This morning I woke up at 5:30 and went online to check the schedule for sunrise. Earlier we used to go and read newspapers for that, but these days we check it online. And several of the sites said that it's 7 minutes past 5. I walked out and I could see the sun rise. Well, not entirely. It was a little cloud. The clouds did get in the way, but I did manage to see the sun. Here's a fact that got verified. Somebody told me that it's going to rise at 7 minutes past 5, and I could verify it. It's a fact that we verify every day. It's a little past 3 right now. If you step out, you will see the sun has walked across the sky. It's more than halfway through. And about 11 minutes past 6 this evening, it will set. But the sun did not rise at the same time in Imphal, the capital of Manipur. There, the sun rose at 5 minutes past 5, and it will set about an hour before it sets in Gwalior. The sun is the center of our universe, and it has been setting and rising right since our solar system came into play about 4.5 billion years ago, when one day on the earth was 4 to 6 hours long. The sun was setting and rising at that time also. Then the moon's gravitational pull slowed the earth's revolutions, and the sun kept rising and kept setting. For about 1 billion years, it's assumed that the earth's average day was 19.5 hours, and the sun was rising and setting. The sun does not take a personal day. The sun does not phone it in. And we can verify the fact every day. It was rising when it was a fact that the earth is flat. It was setting at that time also. It was rising and setting when it was believed that the sun goes around the earth. And then came our dear friend Nicky Copernicus, and he showed us that it's actually the other way around. It's the earth that revolves around the sun. Well, if there are any people here who do not believe that, who do believe that the earth is flat, please accept my apologies. I do not intend to hurt your feelings. Hurt feelings can lead to people getting killed these days. And a lot depends on which friends of yours are news anchors. So please do not take offense to that. But even for those of us who accept the fact that the earth is roughly spherical and that it goes around the sun, we ask about the time for sunrise and the time for sunset. We know that the sun is not going to rise. We know that the sun is not going to set. We know that it's us going around the sun. We know that it's us revolving on the earth's axis. But we still ask about the time for sunrise. When is the sun going to set? That's because our experienced reality shows us that the sun rises, walks across the sky, and then sets. Our experiential reality does not allow us to sense the earth's rotation. That's a truth, but that fact is beyond our comprehension. That brings us to a major truth about facts. Our facts are determined by our setting. What we see, what we sense, it depends on the time and space that we acquire. A lot also depends on the tools we use. which is why the earth was once flat and now it's round, but it's still flat for many people, because the tools we use for our cognition are different. And once you take that fact out of its context, it loses meaning and it stops contributing to the truth. In physics, this is called actually, some of you might be familiar with this book, The Little Prince. It's by a French author and aviator, Anthony de Saint-Exupéry. It talks about a young prince who lives on a small planet, and all he really enjoys watching the sunset. So all he has to do to watch the sunset is move his chair a few steps, and then he can watch the sunset again. And then he describes that on a particular day, he actually watched the sunset 44 times. We don't get to see that on the earth, but we do get to see the observer effect all around us. And of course, the most famous example of this is the most tortured cat in popular culture, Schrodinger's cat. But another way of seeing the observer effect is if you use a temperature, if you use a thermometer to measure the temperature, the thermometer is going to absorb a part of the heat in order to reflect accurately the temperature of the substance, which means the fact of measuring it takes some of the heat out. And this is the observer effect. It works for many things, even if it's just ever so slightly. In medical science, we have something called the observer bias. And this is a distortion of data that comes from either the observer or the source of the data. And the most common example of this is white coat hypertension. When you go to the doctor's clinic and your blood pressure is taken, it's a little higher for some people. It's a little higher because their blood pressure is being monitored. And that goes to another level in medical experiments where they are required to conduct what are called randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled medical trials. I love this term. Randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled clinical trials. Because in science, it is accepted that if you are conducting an experiment, you bring to it your own biases. And this goes to ridiculous limits in popular culture, where we have a television series called House MD, which is roughly based on Sherlock Holmes. And House does not like meeting patients because he tells this is the pilot episode was titled Everybody Lies, which is why House never meets the doctors. Let's get back to nonfiction, and this is one of the wonderful books that you will come across on facts. Sam Arbesman is a complex systems scientist specializing in mathematics, and he talks about how facts actually have a half-life. And he's looked around the world for experiments that describe what this half-life is. And in one experiment, this is from Paris, and a bunch of doctors who treated liver conditions, 2 liver conditions, cirrhosis and another one, they actually realized, they surveyed all the papers relevant to their subject, and they realized in 45 years, half the facts that they learned had been disproved. So that's the half-life of facts, 45 years. Now, the number. But let's get back to the sun, because that is actually our biggest truth. And it points to what is currently the biggest problem that we face. How do we know about this problem? It starts with a little experiment on the 11th of February in 1800. an astronomer called William Herschel set up an experiment to measure the difference in temperature of the colors included in sunlight. So he split the colors through a prism. And then he put thermometers under each color. And then, as scientists are supposed to do, he put another thermometer beyond the light spectrum, which is what scientists call control. And then he realized that there was a difference in temperature, but the temperature was actually highest on the control thermometer. And he realized there is a part of the sun's radiation that we cannot see. And he called this invisible light. Later, we were going to call it infrared radiation. Now we know that roughly less than half of sunlight is in the visible range, and a little less than half is infrared. The year in which William Herschel died, a French mathematician called Joseph Fourier gave a theory that the Earth's atmosphere works like an invisible blanket that keeps the sun's warmth from escaping the planet. Joseph Fourier was obsessed with heat. The French Emperor Napoleon had taken him to Egypt with him, and he'd become obsessed with heat since then, and he used to believe that heat has therapeutic powers. So he was looking for sources of heat, and it said that he died prematurely because of keeping his room excessively warm. But at this time, there was a fear in Europe and the Americas that the Ice Age is going to come back. And several scientists were obsessed with heat. Among them was the Irishman John Tyndall, who devised a contraption that showed for the first time that it's carbon dioxide which traps heat. And he was very happy about it because that meant the Ice Age is not going to come back. Also, he wasn't the first man to do it. The first person to show the effect of carbon dioxide like this was a woman called Eunice Foote, who we don't even have a single picture of hers to show here, because women's contribution to science wasn't even acknowledged at that time. Soon, we had a Swedish physicist and a chemist, Svante Arrhenius, who actually gave a mathematical formula to how carbon dioxide traps heat. And he was also very happy about it, because he thought the Ice Age is not going to come back. Arrhenius' distant relative is a young lady called Greta Thunberg. You might have heard of her. Then comes an engineer called Guy Callender, who's the first man to take data from across the world, compile it to show how the climate is getting warmed, and he's also very happy that the Earth is going to stay warm and the Ice Age is not going to come back. But by now, people have begun to realize that something is going wrong. A scientist called Charles David Keeling, in 1958, he begins to measure carbon dioxide levels on the island of Hawaii, which is in the middle of the Pacific, very far from any kind of disturbance. And he begins to show that the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere is rising rapidly. And by this time, in the 60s came the first climate model, 1967, that actually showed a correlation. And by this time, scientists are beginning to get worried, because it's not just the Ice Age. What this shows is that the planet is in for changes that are fundamental. And one of the first scientists to figure this out is James Hansen, who had done his PhD on Venus. And those of us who are familiar with astronomy would know that Venus actually had runaway climate change to the point where it is the hottest planet in our solar system now. When he realized something similar was happening on the Earth, he began to focus on the Earth. And this picture is actually from his testimony in front of the US Senate, where he became the scientist who actually woke up people, trying to tell them that climate change is going to change our world in ways that we cannot even imagine. Most of his early predictions have come true. And by the 70s, both corporations and government scientists across the world were getting to know that climate change is real, it's a great threat, but here's the big truth. Nobody wanted to change. An international treaty was signed for this in 1992 to stop carbon dioxide. The source of climate change, you go around asking people, they'll give different answers. It's just two sources, coal and petroleum. And nobody knows how to run the current economy without coal and petroleum. But we've known that what we are doing is wrong it's very bad for us for at least 50 years. And yet we are not able to do anything about it. I'd like to leave you with the words of a man much wiser than myself. This is Jacob Bronowski's words in 1973, where he tries to, he said this in the context of the Holocaust in Germany, but he said that science is a very human form of knowledge. We're always at the brink of the known. We always feel forward for what is to be hoped. Every judgment in science stands on the edge of error and is personal. Science is a tribute to what we can know, although we are fallible. So here are the last two things that I'd like to leave you with. One, our cognitive system did not evolve to accurately decipher the truth and to be able to tell you. And the second part is that the universe, we don't know why it was created, but it definitely wasn't created to be understood by us. Pavanji said before me, that's what I said. So if it depends on the observer, then in that condition, the observer is the judge of whether it's a fact or not. The perception of reality is subjective. There is an objective reality, but the cutting edge of neuroscience is now telling us that we have partial access to that reality. Our best instruments, our wisest people, our wisest scholars can access that reality only in small parts and for a limited amount of time. Thank you.
Request